She was 25 when Declan Marsh had his attorney call. There was no conversation, no final fight, just a voice, clipped and neutral, on the other end of her cell phone. The voice informed her that the lease on their shared apartment had been transferred into Mr. Marsh's name exclusively. The voice informed her that the joint savings and checking accounts had been closed, the assets moved to a private account under the same name. The voice informed her that she had 48 hours to retrieve her personal effects, after which point the locks would be changed. She walked back into the apartment that was no longer hers and saw the methodical nature of the departure. It was not a place of heartbreak. It was a division of assets. He had been brutally, transactionally efficient. He took the Danish teak sideboard, the one he always called a good piece, with a future auction value. He took the matched set of German kitchen knives. He took the Italian leather sofa, the abstract art prints they had bought together, the sound system with its carefully calibrated speakers. He took everything that had a clear and quantifiable market price. He took the life they had built because, to him, it was a portfolio of objects. He left her with her clothes, her books on sediment transport, and a box of old family photographs he had never once bothered to open. In that box were the folded, brittle papers detailing a small, forgotten property on the Ohio River. He had never asked about it. He did not know it existed. She had grown up understanding the river the way some children grow up understanding the quiet necessity of a library or the specific cadence of a prayer. For Maren, the river was a text she had been learning to read since birth. It was not just water. It was a force with a memory, a character, a will. She understood the subtle shift in color that foretold a storm coming down from the north, the particular pattern of ripples that spoke of a hidden sandbar just beneath the surface, the deep, guttural groan of a barge pushing 15 containers of coal against a heavy current. This understanding was a language passed down, not in words, but in shared silences with her father, standing on the edge of a pier, watching the slow, immense power of the water shaping the land. It was a knowledge that had settled deep in her bones, a quiet inheritance that had eventually led her to study hydrology, to seek the physics and mathematics that explained the river's ancient poetry. She saw the world in terms of watersheds, flow rates, and erosion patterns, a clinical overlay on a deeply personal landscape. Her father, Tomás Solis, had been the second generation of his family on that river. His own father, her abuelo, had come from the dry plains of Chihuahua and found in the immense, muddy artery of the Ohio a strange and powerful mirror to the endless sky he had left behind. He had started with nothing, a deckhand on a rust-bucket towboat, and learned the river inch by painful inch. He learned its treachery and its generosity, its sudden furies and its long, placid moods. Tomás inherited that knowledge and refined it. He was a man of quiet competence, his hands shaped by rope and steel, his face weathered by 1,000 sunrises over the water. He had the particular quality of stillness that comes to men who spend their lives in the presence of a vast, moving thing. He didn't just pilot boats, he communed with the current. He could feel a change in the river's speed through the soles of his boots, a subtle vibration in the deck plates that told him more than any gauge on the console. He was a man who believed in things that could not be easily measured. He believed in the weight of a promise, the strength of a properly tied knot, and the deep, abiding wisdom of the water. He faced loss with the same stoic patience. When a sudden downturn in the shipping economy cost his family their primary contract, forcing them to sell the one boat they owned outright, he did not despair. He took on extra work, piloting for other companies, his reputation for safety and reliability preceding him. He saved slowly and methodically, not with the goal of grand wealth, but with the quiet determination to secure a piece of the river for himself, a place that could not be taken away by a fluctuating market or a faithless partner. That was when he found the old Riverboat office. It was a forgotten relic from the age of steam, a single-story box of corrugated steel perched on thick wooden pilings at the end of a crumbling pier. The company that owned it had gone bankrupt decades ago, and the building had been left to the elements. The county saw it as a liability, an eyesore. Tomas saw its soul. He saw the wide, grime-coated bay window that looked out over the main channel, the solid Douglas fir beams that held up the roof, the deep, unshakable foundation driven into the riverbed. He bought it for a pittance for the cost of the back taxes owed, and it became his sanctuary. It was not an investment. It was an anchor. Maren remembered that office from childhood summers. The smell of it was a unique alchemy of river damp, creosote from the pilings, and the faint metallic scent of her father's thermos of black coffee. She would sit for hours on a tall stool, watching him at the old dispatch desk, listening to the crackle of the radio and the distant, mournful horns of the towboats. He taught her things there. He taught her how to read a navigational chart, tracing the contour lines of the riverbed with his calloused finger. He taught her the names of the towboats that passed, the Iron Queen, the Midland Pride, the Sarah B., and the histories of the captains who piloted them. He spoke of the river as a living thing, a powerful and sometimes dangerous neighbor that demanded respect. He taught her to listen to the sound of the water lapping against the pilings, to the cry of the gulls, to the silence between the passing barges. It was in those quiet moments that she had absorbed his particular kind of wealth, a legacy of observation and deep, abiding connection. Then she had gone to the city, to the university, and she had met Declan. He had been attentive in the specific way that lonely people find irresistible. He listened to her, or so she thought, but he was not hearing what she said. He was collecting data. He learned that she was smart, that she was studying a difficult and respected field, that she was quiet and self-sufficient. He saw these traits as assets, components of a successful partnership. He was a consultant in urban development, a man who saw cities not as collections of lives, but as grids of opportunity, of undervalued properties and zoning variances. His language was the language of leverage, of return on investment, of maximizing potential. He was fascinated by her competence, but utterly blind to its source. He loved that she was a hydrological engineer, but he never once asked to see the river she studied. He saw her quiet nature not as a sign of inner strength and careful observation, but as a lack of competitive drive, a void he could fill with his own ambitions. Their life together was a project he managed. He chose the apartment for its resale value. He chose their friends based on their professional networks. He chose their vacations based on their Instagrammability. Maren, caught in the undertow of his confidence, had allowed it to happen. She had kept her deepest self, the part of her that belonged to the river, hidden away from him. It was a quiet act of self-preservation. She knew on some instinctual level that he could not understand it. To him, her father's rusted office was just a derelict building, a liability. He would have seen the rot in the pier, the rust on the walls, the peeling paint on the window frames. He would have calculated the cost of demolition. He would never have seen the view. He would never have understood the anchor. The bus ride south was a slow, deliberate unwinding. With every mile, the dense, vertical geometry of the city dissolved into the long, horizontal lines of the Illinois prairie. Maren sat by the window, her entire worldly possessions reduced to a single large suitcase and the worn leather field bag that held the tools of her trade. Inside the bag were her survey instruments, her waterproof notebooks, her well-used copies of textbooks on fluvial geomorphology, and the small, sealed envelope containing the last $217 from her personal account. She watched the landscape change, the concrete and glass giving way to fields of corn and soy, the horizon widening until it was a vast, unbroken line. The air that hissed from the small vent above her head began to lose its urban sharpness, taking on the scent of damp earth and growing things. She was not running away. She was running toward the only thing she had left. She was returning to the source. The bus pulled into the small town of Cairo, a place that felt more like a forgotten memory than a living community. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of the river, a constant, pervasive presence. She found the lawyer's office in a small brick building on a street of closed storefronts. The name on the glass was faded but legible. Abernathy and Son, attorneys at law. Inside, a man who must have been Mr. Abernathy himself, ancient and stooped, looked up from a desk buried under mountains of paper. He peered at her over the top of his spectacles. When she said her name, Marin Solis, a slow smile spread across his wrinkled face. He rose with a groan and shuffled to a massive filing cabinet, pulling out a thick, dusty folder. He didn't rush. He moved with the unhurried pace of a man who had long ago made peace with the passage of time. He spread the papers on his desk, the deed, the title, all in order. He spoke in a soft, dry voice that rustled like old leaves. "Your father, Tomas," he said, pausing to look at her directly. "He was a good man, the best pilot on this stretch of the Ohio. Some men fight the river. They try to command it. Your father, he listened to it. He trusted the water, and he trusted you." He pushed a small, heavy object across the desk. It was an iron key, ornate and heavy, its surface pitted with age and coated in a fine layer of rust. It felt substantial in her palm, a piece of tangible history. "He paid the taxes on this place every year, right on time," Abernathy continued. "Said it was his peace of quiet. Said it was for you, for when you needed it." She walked the half-mile to the river's edge, the iron key clutched in her hand. And then she saw it, the Riverboat office. It was exactly as she remembered, only more so. The corrugated steel walls were no longer just rusted. They were a deep, complex tapestry of umber, sienna, and burnt orange, a testament to decades of sun and rain and river spray. It stood on its thick creosote pilings, a lone sentinel at the end of a pier whose wooden planks were warped and grayed with age. To any other eye, it was a ruin. To Declan, it would have been an immediate write-off, a negative number on a balance sheet. But Marin saw what her father had seen. She saw the building's posture, the way it leaned into the prevailing wind, solid and unmoving. She saw the straight, true lines of the roof, the unbroken panes of the large bay window, cloudy with grime but intact. She saw its good bones. It was not beautiful, but it was honest. It was a structure that had endured. The lock on the heavy steel door was stiff, but with a firm turn, the iron key worked. The door groaned open, and she stepped inside, into a pocket of preserved time. The air was cool and still, thick with the familiar scents of her childhood, rust, damp wood, old paper, and the ever-present earthy smell of the river. A thick layer of dust covered everything, softening the sharp edges of the room. Sunlight struggled through the grimy bay window, illuminating a blizzard of dancing dust motes. In the center of the room stood the old dispatch desk, a massive, scarred piece of oak. A vintage radio sat on its surface, silent and coated in dust. A single wooden stool stood beside it. She crossed the room and ran her hand over the desk's surface, feeling the familiar geography of its scratches and gouges. She remembered her father sitting there, his back straight, his gaze fixed on the water. Following a half-forgotten memory, she knelt and ran her hand along the underside of the desk's deep knee-hole. Her fingers brushed against a small, recessed metal latch. She flicked it, and a section of the floorboards beneath the desk came loose. She lifted the small trapdoor. In the dark cavity below sat a heavy, brass-bound wooden box. A navigator's box. It was locked. She had no key for this one. She went back to her field bag and retrieved a geologist's rock hammer and a pry bar. It felt like a violation, but it was a necessary one. With a sharp crack, the old wood splintered and the lock gave way. She lifted the heavy lid. Her breath caught in her throat. The box was filled with money. Bundles of old bills, 20s, 50s, hundreds, their paper soft as cloth, wrapped tightly in twine. Beneath them were canvas bags, heavy and clinking. She poured one out onto the floor. Silver coins spilled out, their designs muted by time. Walking Liberty $50, Mercury dimes, standing Liberty quarters. It was a dragon's hoard of forgotten currency, saved over a lifetime, coin by coin, bill by bill. She sat on the dusty floor and began to count. It was a slow, meditative process. The final tally was just over $45,000. It was not a fortune, but it was enough. It was enough to begin again. At the very bottom of the box, lying flat against the wood, was a single sealed envelope with her name written on it in her father's neat, blocky script, Maren. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The letter inside was written on a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper. "Mija," it began, "if you are reading this, it means you have found your way back. I am sorry I am not there to welcome you. I hope you are not in trouble, but I know how the world can turn on a person, so I left this for you, just in case. This place is not a house. It is an anchor. It holds. The money should be enough to fix what needs fixing and give you time to breathe. Abernathy is an honest man. The roof needs patching before winter. Call a man named Elias Rowe. He's a good roofer, and he owes me a favor. Do not let him overcharge you for the sealant. Some people measure life in dollars, in property, in things they can count. We Solis, we measure it in different ways. We measure it in tons of freight moved safely down the channel, in passages navigated through fog and storm, in the steady rise and fall of the water. This is a different kind of wealth. This place, this river, it is your inheritance. It is not something you own. It is something you belong to. Remember to listen to the water. It will always tell you the truth. With all my love, Papa." Maren held the letter and laughed, a short, real laugh, the first one in weeks. Then she cried, silent tears tracking clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. The words on the page were not just a letter. They were a validation, a map, a restoration of her own soul. He had seen her. He had always seen her. The first call she made was to Elias Rowe. A gruff but friendly voice answered the phone. When she explained who she was and what she needed, there was a long pause. "Tomas Solis's daughter," he finally said, his voice softening. "Your father taught me how to tie a bowline knot that never slips, back when I was a dumb kid working the summer on a grain barge. Said it was a knot that could save a man's life. He was right. For his daughter, the price is fair." The next morning, Rowe arrived in a battered pickup truck, a man in his late 60s with hands like gnarled oak roots and eyes the color of the sky over the river. He walked the perimeter of the office, squinting up at the roof. "Good bones," he grunted, echoing Maren's own thoughts. Tomas always knew a solid thing when he saw it. Maren didn't just write him a check and disappear. When he climbed the ladder, she followed him. She wanted to learn. She wanted to feel the work in her own hands. He showed her how to find the weak seams in the corrugated steel, how to clean out the rust with a wire brush, how to apply the thick black sealant with a trowel, working it deep into the joints. The work was hard and repetitive. The sun beat down on the metal roof, and the smell of the sealant was acrid and overwhelming. But Maren found a deep and profound satisfaction in it. The simple, rhythmic motion of her arm, the feel of the tool in her hand, the visible progress as a rusted seam became a smooth, black, waterproof line. It was a tangible act of restoration. It was a direct contrast to her work with Declan, which had been abstract, conducted through emails and spreadsheets. This was real. This was sweat and effort, and a roof that would no longer leak. Elias Rowe worked beside her, offering quiet words of guidance, occasionally sharing a story about her father. He never said much. Rowe recalled, pausing to wipe his brow. "But when he did, you listened. He pointed out a shoal to me once, a new one that had formed after a high water. Wasn't on any chart yet. He just knew. Saved my boss a new propeller and me my job." By the end of the week, the roof was sealed tight. The work had forged a connection between them, a quiet respect born of shared labor. When she paid him, he handed back 2 of the $100 bills. "For materials," he said gruffly. The labor was for Tomas. With the building secured against the elements, Maren turned her attention to the inside. The next few weeks were a blur of cleaning. She started with the great bay window. It took 2 full days of scrubbing with vinegar and old newspapers, scraping away years of grime and salt spray. But when she was done, the light flooded into the room, and the river view was breathtakingly sharp and clear. It was like a living painting, constantly changing with the light and the weather and the slow parade of barges. She scrubbed the wooden floors on her hands and knees, pulling up old, rotting linoleum to reveal the wide, strong planks of Douglas fir beneath. She spent a week sanding them down, the whine of the rented machine filling the space, the air thick with the sweet smell of sawdust. When she sealed them with tung oil, the wood's deep, rich grain emerged, warm and glowing. She polished every piece of brass in the room, the fittings on the old radio, the handles on the desk drawers, the frame of a barometer still hanging on the wall, until they shone with a soft, buttery light. She did not want to turn the office into a cozy home. That felt wrong, a betrayal of its purpose. It was a place of work, of observation. She bought only what was necessary from the town's salvage yards and second-hand stores. A simple iron-framed cot for sleeping, a sturdy wooden table and 2 chairs for working and eating, a small, efficient cast-iron stove for heat against the damp river chill. She arranged the space to suit her new life. The great desk remained the room's focal point, its surface now cleared and organized, holding her laptop, her notebooks, and her father's old navigational charts, which she carefully unrolled and weighted down. The space was sparse, functional, and deeply peaceful. Her life had been stripped down to its essential elements, and in that simplicity she found a profound sense of freedom. The money from her father's box was a gift of time, but it was finite. She needed work. She saw a posting on the county's website for a junior hydrological engineer with the Water Management District. The job description felt as though it had been written for her. Field surveys of riverbank erosion, analysis of sediment load data, monitoring of levee integrity. It was practical, hands-on work, a world away from the theoretical modeling she had been doing in the city. She applied, not expecting much. A week later, she was called for an interview. The supervisor was a woman named Carol Brandt, a no-nonsense individual in her 50s with a firm handshake and sharp, intelligent eyes. She looked over Maren's resume, her expression unreadable. She asked a series of technical questions, which Maren answered calmly and precisely. Then Carol tapped her finger on the line showing Maren's local address. "The old Solis place on the pier," she said, more a statement than a question. "You're Tomas's girl?" Maren nodded. A smile touched the corner of Carol's mouth. "Your father helped us map the sediment flows after the big flood in '97. The Army Corps of Engineers had all their fancy sonar. But your dad knew that riverbed by heart. He showed us where the channel was scouring under the bridge abutment before their equipment ever picked it up. He knew this river better than any textbook." She leaned back in her chair. "You can have the best degree in the world, but you can't teach that kind of knowledge. It's in the blood." Maren got the job. Her new life found its rhythm. Her days were spent out on the river in a small survey boat, taking measurements, collecting samples, her skin turning brown under the sun. She loved the work. It connected the 2 halves of herself, the scientist who understood the formulas, and the river daughter who understood the flow. In the evenings and on weekends, she returned to her office on the pier and began a personal project. Using her father's old, hand-drawn charts as a foundation, she began to create a new, intensely detailed hydrological map of their specific bend in the Ohio River. She overlaid his careful pencil lines with data from her modern GPS and sonar equipment. She added layers for water velocity, for sediment composition, for seasonal changes in depth. It was a dialogue across time, a fusion of his generational knowledge and her scientific training. The map grew, covering the largest wall of the office, a beautiful and complex tapestry of lines, numbers, and notes. It was a portrait of the river, and it was a portrait of her family. Word travels fast in a small town. The light on in the old Solis office, seen from across the water at night, was a beacon. Soon, people started to stop by. They were mostly older men, retired towboat captains and deckhands, men who had known her father. They would appear at her door, holding a thermos of coffee or a bag of fresh donuts, their curiosity piqued. They would step inside, their eyes taking in the clean, orderly space, the shining floors, and the great growing map on the wall. They would nod in slow appreciation. "Tomas would like what you've done here," one of them said. A man named Gus, whose face was a roadmap of his years on the water. They would sit with her at the wooden table, sharing stories. They spoke of her father's uncanny ability to navigate in thick fog, his calm demeanor during a sudden squall, his quiet generosity. They told her things she had never known, filling in the details of the man she had only known as a father. Through their stories, he became a legend of the river, his legacy alive in the memory of the community. They looked at her, at his daughter, and they saw a continuation. They saw her charts, they heard her talk about flow rates and bank stability, and they recognized the same deep understanding expressed in a new language. They accepted her not as a newcomer, but as a rightful heir. She was Maren Solis, Tomas's girl. She was home. Late one afternoon in May, when the trees along the riverbank were flush with a vibrant, impossible green, and the river itself was high and swift with spring melt, a car appeared at the end of the access road. It was a sleek, silver German sedan, absurdly clean and out of place against the muddy, rutted track. It parked, and Declan Marsh got out. Maren was on the pier, checking the integrity of a piling, and she watched him approach. He was wearing a pale gray linen suit and shoes of soft, expensive Italian leather that were now collecting burrs and mud. He looked like an alien, dropped into a world he was not equipped to navigate. He stopped at the edge of the pier and stared at the office, his mouth slightly agape. He was not looking at a rusted shack. He was looking at a clean, well-tended structure, its windows gleaming, a thin curl of smoke rising from its stovepipe. He saw her standing there, her jeans stained with creosote, her hair tied back, her face calm and tanned from the sun. He saw a stranger. He walked carefully down the pier, his expensive shoes slipping on the damp planks. He stopped a few feet from her. His eyes darted around, taking in the solid repairs, the neat stack of firewood, the clear view of the river through the window. He was processing, calculating, reassessing. "Maren," he said, his voice strained. I didn't know about this place." He gestured vaguely at the office, at the river, at her entire world. "I ran a property search, of course, for the divorce settlement, a thorough one. This never came up." The words hung in the air between them, a confession not of remorse, but of a professional oversight. He hadn't been thorough enough in his accounting of her worth. "It was never on a balance sheet," she said. Her voice was quiet, even, without a trace of anger. It was simply a statement of fact. He looked from the office to her face, a flicker of genuine confusion in his eyes. He was seeing, perhaps for the first time, the vast territory of her life that he had never bothered to explore. He saw the competence in her posture, the self-sufficiency that he had once mistaken for passivity. He saw that she did not need him, that she had never truly needed him. The realization seemed to unmoor him. The carefully constructed confidence he wore like his tailored suit began to fray at the edges. "You never told me," he said, a hint of accusation in his tone. "You never told me about any of this." She looked at him, her gaze as steady and clear as the deep channel of the river. "You never asked, Declan," she replied. "In 5 years, you never once asked me about my father. You never asked where I came from. You just assumed I had been waiting for you to invent me." The truth of her words silenced him. He looked away toward the vast, moving expanse of the river as if seeing it for the first time. He saw the power in it, the immense, unquantifiable value that could not be captured in a spreadsheet or a development proposal. He saw the source of the strength in her that he had so profoundly misunderstood. A desperate, grasping look came over his face. He saw what he had lost, and like a good investor, he wanted to cut his losses, to recover the asset. "Is there," he started, his voice uncertain, "is there a way we can fix this? Is there anything left?" Maren followed his gaze to the water. She watched a long towboat push its cargo upstream, a slow and steady progress against the powerful current. She thought of her father, of his quiet patience, of his deep and abiding love. She thought of the legacy he had left her, a legacy not of money, but of knowledge, of belonging, of an anchor in the storm. She had everything she needed. She turned back to Declan, her expression one of calm, gentle finality. "No," she said, "there isn't." He accepted it. There was no argument, no plea. He had built his world on the principle of leverage, and in that moment, standing on a pier he didn't understand, beside a woman he had never truly known, he finally realized he had none. He nodded once, a short, defeated gesture. He turned and walked back down the pier, his steps less confident now, his expensive suit looking rumpled and sad. He got into his silver car, and without looking back, he drove away, leaving behind only the faint scent of his cologne, which the river breeze quickly carried away. That evening, Maren sat in a simple wooden chair on the pier, a mug of hot coffee warming her hands. She watched the last light of the sun paint the underside of the clouds in shades of rose and violet. The river below was a ribbon of molten gold, then deep purple, then, finally, a dark, shimmering obsidian. The air grew cool, and the first stars pricked the velvet sky. She thought about the generations of her family who had watched this same water, under these same stars. Her abuelo, who had seen in its vastness a new kind of horizon. Her father, who had learned its language and its secrets. And now her, the keeper of their legacy, translating their knowledge into a new form, ensuring it would endure. She thought about Declan, a man so focused on quantifiable value that he had become blind to true worth. He lived in a world of surfaces, of polished facades and market trends, a world as shallow and shifting as a sandbar. He could calculate the value of a building's square footage, but could not comprehend the value of its history. He could appraise a piece of art, but could not see the beauty of a sunset on the water. He was the one who was impoverished, living a life of carefully curated emptiness. Her inheritance was not the rusted office, not the money in the box. It was the river itself. It was the deep, unshakable knowledge of who she was and where she came from. It was the quiet confidence that came from knowing her place in the world, a place secured not by a deed or a bank account, but by a legacy of resilience, observation, and love. Declan had taken everything he could count. He had taken the furniture with its documented provenance, the art with its appraised value, the savings account with its neat digital balance. He had taken every asset that could be listed, every possession that could be photographed and sold. He had stripped her life bare of anything the world considered to be of worth. He had left behind the only thing that mattered. He forgot the rusted riverboat office her father left. It was the best thing he ever forgot.